Cheers.
Cheers.
Welcome to Culture Night,
where each week we drink fancy wine and watch movies that are in some way culturally significant. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Sarah. And we want to start by, again, thanking everybody who's listening, who's watching on YouTube, all the podcast platforms. We've also had a huge bump up in our number of views on our shorts on YouTube this week. So that was pretty exciting. And hoping that turns into more subscribers and viewers and listeners on all the things.
Still need to list ourselves on YouTube music podcasts, though.
I know.
Still working on that.
I know. Again, it was on the to-do list. To-do list is tough to get to.
But this is episode 9.
Yes, 9. Oh man, I can't believe next week's 10.
Almost the double digits. So
it's flying by.
Let's hop into some podcast business.
Yes, we want to start by apologizing for our audio snafu last week. We are still getting used to the Rodecaster, and we switched one of the settings of how it downloads to the editing software and just didn't check whether or not it was mono or stereo. And anyways, I think we fixed it for this week, and I know what to look for this time. But
yeah, it was all kind of on one ear just because of the way it does the tracks when you export it. And I guess listening to it on the laptop wasn't as evident when that it was not playing from both ears, but got that fixed pretty quickly. So
yes,
should be able to fix that going forward.
Yep. And now we are still riding high from last week. We're going to go into our slept on it portion where we revisit last week, where we watched Top Gun from 1986. And to start with, does your rating change after sleeping on it?
I don't remember what my rating was, so I'm going to say...
I want to say it was 8.
That feels about right. Yeah.
Mine was 7 at the end of the movie last week. And after listening to last week's podcast about Indiana Jones and how I rated that 6.8, I enjoyed Top Gun far more than I enjoyed Indiana Jones. So I'm going to bump my rating up to a 7.6. Nice. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I really actually want to watch it again.
I know. It was really good. And I guess we'll get to it in a little bit, but we, the very next night, watched Top Gun Maverick, that you were just so excited about it that I could tell you liked it so much, because normally you're like, okay, next movie. Whereas this time you're like, I need to see more. Yeah.
I wasn't done. I can't believe most other people waited, 35 years between the original and
35
the sequel.
hours.
And yep, that's about it.
Yeah. I guess you did some deep dives. I did one, so I'll start with you.
In keeping with we need to know more about these movies, I did a couple deep dives. I mentioned last week that I would look into the MPAA ratings for movies. And first of all, MPAA stands for Motion Picture Association of America, but I believe now it's MPA. They dropped of America. It's just the Motion Picture Association. And this rating system replaced the Hays Production Code, which was used from the 30s to the 60s, which mostly was just like a self-censorship type of rating system. And they told them what they could and couldn't put in there. And they just it was up to the movie producers, I guess, to censor their own movies.
Gotcha.
And then when this new system was put in place, there were 4 major categories. This was in 1966. It was G for general audiences, M for mature audiences, R for restricted, which means no children under 17 allowed without a parent or adult guardian, and then X, which was no one under 17 admitted at all.
So I guess that's where the whole X-rated comes from. You don't really hear that nowadays. It's all R.
Yeah. So that system, obviously that's been revised. And in 1969, the M rating was changed to PG for parental guidance. So I guess going from mature to parental guidance makes a little bit more sense, especially for these movies that we've been watching in the 60s, 70s, 80s, where it was called PG by the time we watched most of these movies, but that helps that make a little bit more sense.
I guess as they kind of figured out where the boundaries of those were, but if you think of those instead of being rated PG as just being rated mature, it makes a lot more sense.
And then in 1984, they added the PG-13 label. And then in 1990, they dropped the X rating and just call it NC-17 instead. And these ratings are determined by the Classifications Rating Administration via a board comprised of an independent group of parents. So parents make the ratings, which I guess makes sense if you want parents of the current time censoring the current movies that are coming out and what they...
Yeah, I wonder if they really kind of adapt that based on current popular sentiment, or if it mainly just kind of stays.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I didn't go too deep into what qualifications are for being on that board, but...
Interesting.
I found it interesting that it was parents. So then the other one I said I was going to look into was aviator sunglasses, and which came first, chicken or the egg, the sunglasses or the name or whatever. And they were developed by Bausch and Lomb in 1936, specifically for aviator pilots. They were not called aviators at the time, but they were designed to protect their eyes from flying, and they were designed to replace what the outmodeled flight goggles that had previously been used, which is a little bit of a throwback to like, was it The Jerk where he had the leather cap and goggles? So the aviators were to replace those like goggle protection.
Gotcha. Yeah, I guess it'd be a lot more comfortable to fly in those than having full on goggles.
And they were lighter, thinner, and more elegantly designed, according to this website.
Yeah.
And this style of sunglasses is credited as being one of the first popularized style of sunglasses to be developed. So I guess sunglasses weren't super popular before this.
The first sunglass style.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And when they went to be marketed to the non-military people, it was when they started going by Ray-Bans. So they were Ray-Bans aviators when they were sent out to the public. And they were made really famous by General Douglas MacArthur when he was photographed wearing them when he landed on the beaches in World War II. But other famous people who are known for wearing them are Michael Jackson and Elvis Presley. Also, the advertisement for when they were sent out to the public was the like tagline for them was "They are real scientific glare protection." So
backed by science.
Yeah, they were sold as sporting equipment.
Interesting.
So they were originally designed for aviator pilots, but they were not called aviators until they became more popularized.
I bet there's probably a huge blow up after Top Gun came out too, with the whole like rise of sales.
Yeah, and it kind of talked about how they kind of like have risen and fallen in popularity, especially like with like Michael Jackson and some of those like other famous people bringing them back into popularity. But I'm sure Top Gun, huge spike in sales after that.
I looked into like Top Gun, like the real Top Gun, the school that it's based off of, and it's an actual course. And it's comprised, or at least originally was comprised of, a 13-week course or 2 9-week courses. So the main one that the movie's based on is like based off the 13-week course, and it is like supposed to be training the best of the best. The real like background behind it, or its real kind of like claim to fame was during the Vietnam War. Basically, for every let's say like million launches of the planes, we were losing like 1,000 planes. So it was kind of like a high like loss ratio. And so during the Vietnam War was when the Top Gun like school was really developed. And there had been like a ceasement in like the fighter bombings. And that happened to kind of coincide with like this training for the naval aviators. And so when they picked back up with that, with all of the bombings, they found that their kill to death ratio had fallen from 2.42 kills per death of like losing a plane to 12.5 to 1. So much better there. Whereas the Air Force that didn't incorporate a school like this during that same time actually saw their kill to death ratio, or kill ratio worsen. So that kind of like really kind of legitimized the whole Top Gun as its own school. But what I find really interesting is that ever since the movie came out, if you reference Top Gun, the movie, while at the school, that it incurs an immediate $5 cash fine. So they don't want people like going around just like making fun of everything. They say it's for, they want an atmosphere of professionalism. They don't want a bunch of people just like quoting and making fun of it and being there just to goof around.
That makes sense for sure. I mean, it's not like being in college or some kind of goofing around thing. It's a pretty serious business that they're trying to take care of there.
It's kind of interesting because there is a definite relationship with, between the military and Hollywood, because Top Gun is basically like propaganda for joining the military, or joining at least
they definitely make it look cool.
Yeah, joining the Navy in that case. And so in that partnership, generally like Hollywood gets access to film a lot of places they wouldn't otherwise be able to, and the military gets to benefit from all of the free advertisement essentially. So it totally makes sense why you wouldn't want people just like going around making fun of it all the time. But I find it's funny, like you probably have to carry like a stack of cash, because I'm sure it's so hard to resist like making a joke like without even thinking about it. But kind of funny there.
Very interesting. So that's it for our deep dives. And now we'll hop into Top Gun Maverick for just a few minutes, because we talked about doing like a special bonus episode, but I feel like there's not too much to say.
Yeah, we'll give it a quick couple minutes though. It's interesting how the very beginning, it was like the same almost like exact same opening sequence, same songs and everything, that if you weren't paying attention, you wouldn't really notice, like, is this the new one or is it the old one? Obviously the footage looked a little bit cleaner in the new one, but was a really good kind of like throwback to the original.
Yeah. And I think I loved it even more because I'd mentioned when we watched the original Top Gun, how much I loved the opening scene, as I felt like it really set, the setting of the movie there on the aircraft carrier, all the jobs that everybody does. And then to see it again, come back in the new movie. I was really excited to see all that again.
Yeah.
We also had a little bit of diversity though, bringing it into the present times of making sure we include everybody and by real diversity, I really just mean there was a woman in the group of pilots.
Yeah. It was, definitely a much more modern, group there. And
which I anticipated.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't a huge amount, but I imagine that it probably more represents more of what the current, makeup is in the actual, military at those levels, that, at least making headway there, but yeah. Definitely a more modern casting there.
For sure. And everyone will be pleased to note that they fixed Tom Cruise's unibrow in the new movie. And by fixed it, I mean he had
must
clean.
have had it waxed.
Yes. And I'm sure it was fixed many, many years before then. But
they didn't fix his teeth. I assumed his teeth would have been like completely brilliant white, all
like veneers reshaped.
But it definitely seems to be at least his original teeth there. So
I feel like there may be a little bit straighter, but not a huge difference.
Yeah.
Yes. So we were really just paying close attention to Tom Cruise's personal looks. But
definitely a great movie. It got a lot of hype, and I was afraid that it was not going to live up to it. But I definitely enjoyed the second one. They made it seem mostly, believable and realistic. And
and I feel like it had a good amount of crossover, like just enough for the nostalgia, especially we're living in such a time where everybody is remakes and rewatches and rebooting things. But I was afraid it would be a little too much, but I think it was just enough of the things that you liked from the first movie without being the exact same movie again, and brought it into modern times.
It's just interesting how they were I assume very purposely vague about who the enemy was in Maverick, because there's not really anyone they probably want to single out of any single culture or country or something like that to just say, we got to take out the enemy, and you never really see them at all.
But I like that though. I feel like it does make it a little bit
easier to root against the enemy when you don't know who they are.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. So are we ready for tonight?
Yeah, let's move on.
All right. What are we drinking tonight?
Tonight it's the 2017 Tobin James Pinot Noir from the Arroyo Grande Valley. Pull up the bottle.
Another Tobin James. I believe this one is from one of our newer shipments, so it should be a fresher bottle, maybe from our November. Was that when we got the last one?
Maybe. 2017 is a lot closer than like the 2013s and 14s. I feel like we've been having a lot, but let's check it out.
It smells nice.
Definitely getting a lot of like dark fruit on the nose.
Oh, it had something on the nose, but it slipped me before I could grasp my mind around it.
And man, I get like sweet tart.
Exactly.
It's not like super tart or anything like that, but like the flavor just feels like
it's just that little bit of an aftertaste of a sweet tart, and almost like that like raspberry sourness.
It feels very light too.
I'm usually not a big Pinot Noir girl. You like them a lot more than I do, but I enjoy this one so far.
Yeah, for how dark
on the first two sips.
For how dark it is, it just feels very, very light. Very good.
It looks dark this way, but as I was pouring it, I noticed it was a lot clearer.
Yeah.
We've really got to brush up on our wine terminology.
It's also very scientific.
Yes, but so far delicious.
Yeah. And so what are we watching tonight?
Tonight we are watching Ferris Bueller's Day Off from 1986. So we're keeping it.
Must have been a good year.
Yeah, we're keeping it same year, same decade, obviously. Switching the genre up a little bit, but that way we didn't have to do research on songs and movies for this week.
Top Gun and
So if you don't know what the top movies and songs from 1986 are, go back and watch last week's podcast. Give it a like, comment,
rate and review all things.
Just a subtle plug
on every platform, all of them.
For last week, episode 8. And this one is rated PG-13. So we will see how that compares to what we've been watching in these PG genres, and now that we know a little bit more about the rating system.
I mean, if what previous PG movies have been what they have been, then this one's going to be like practically porn. So We'll see how this goes.
Have you seen it before?
I have. I honestly don't know if I've watched it all the way through though. I definitely have seen like every bit of it, but I don't think I've ever sat down and actually just watched it. It's just, it's been on, so many times over the years, and I'm excited to actually kind of sit down and like really take it in.
Mm-hmm. I have also seen it, and I believe I sat and watched it all the way through. It's been a while though, like probably 10 years. So I don't really, I remember the general gist. Ferris Bueller takes his day off of school, lives large.
That's all that happens. Yep.
So I'm excited, again, like you said, I'm excited to sit down and kind of really pay attention. And what I've enjoyed so much about this podcast so far is just the things I've started to pay attention to more and making those connections between movies and just making a dedicated effort to sit down and watch a movie every week, and how much more I'm taking from movies and enjoying it a lot more.
With a little different lens and kind of, making notes and comparisons and connections too. Yeah.
Makes it a lot more enjoyable. So
let's dive in.
All right, let's get into Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Okay. You ready?
Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Right.
How was it?
No, we're going to talk about the wine first. We're going to just jump into wine.
Yes, not this wine. This is the after show box wine. Do you want to go first?
Sure. I am giving it a 7.2.
For the wine?
For the wine.
I was going to go with a 6.7.
I will say you've scared me away a little bit from giving anything in the sixes, because you give me such a hard time. It just feels right a lot of the time.
I want to give it a 6.8, but I was like, you always give me either a 6.8 or 6.9. So I was that's why I paused it, because I'm going to give it a 6.7. Just because I feel like you've really laid claim to those two decimal points.
I know.
Yeah, I thought it was good. It wasn't too alcohol forward. Had some.
I thought it was really smooth.
Yeah, like the good like dark fruit, the cherry, the berry flavor, very good.
Yeah, and it gave me some like dark chocolate notes too, just like very smooth. And
I get that a lot in Pinot Noirs.
And I think maybe I'm just like not a big Pinot Noir girl, that I was so caught off guard by how much I liked this. That
I think you said every time we've had like a Pinot Noir lately, you were like, I don't usually like these, but I really like this one.
I don't recall that at all, but I liked this one a lot. Yeah. So I'm on record right now on today's date.
Yeah, I think it was good. I could have done several glasses of that and been very happy.
Definitely could have kept going. Tobin James 2017 Pinot Noir, Arroyo Grande Valley. Delicious.
Highly recommend. For the movie, I'm going to give it a 7.8. You disagree?
No.
It.
I did not hate it. Because I kind of want to give it a 7.2 also. Like, I liked it.
You just latch onto those numbers. Yeah.
It's just hard because like I know we're going to watch so many movies that like I'm going to have to repeat some. And like I like a lot of these movies that I feel like high 6, low 7 is just like a really good place to be, where it's a good movie. I enjoyed it. I'm having a good time with it.
Yeah. But I was thinking about it like a couple minutes ago, like as soon as it ended, and it was enjoyable to watch. If it was on like TBS and I'm just happen to flip through channels and like it's on, probably going to, watch all or most of it.
And I see why it was a big hype.
Yeah. A little bit quotable with the, life moves pretty fast. You don't stop, like all that quote. A lot of iconic. Yeah.
Bueller.
Yeah. That one was way overquoted, that one.
Overdone for sure.
It had some iconic scenes in there that I was trying to like, figure out like, if I was just giving it a base review of the movie itself, I was probably going to go like 7.2, but then I thought more about the rewatchability, the quotability, and that kind of bumped my score up a little bit. So
I do feel like as we are, we're in episode 9, getting to 10, the more we do, the more I kind of figure out what the scale is for me and how I feel about a movie, and having the movies that we've watched in my repertoire now and having to pick a score of like, oh, I remember last week I rated it this, so that I liked this better than that. Like it's so much more going through my head that I think I would go back now retroactively and change some of my scores, just given what we've seen so far.
Yeah, I need to have it laid out where I can see what I've rated things compared to other movies, because right now what I'm basically doing is a gut instinct. This is the score, and then think about other things of like quotability, rewatchability, and whatnot. And I think I'd like to standardize it a bit more, or at least have a more relative score. Just
here are your scores. I do have them.
There you go.
I am a little bit prepared. I do not have Top Gun. Do I have Top Gun in there?
You do have Top Gun.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd probably take The Jerk down a little bit. I think I was a bit happy with that one and gave it a 7.7. It was fine. It probably should have been closer to 7 flat. But otherwise, definitely didn't like Never Been Kissed.
That's
that's
definitely, I think, the worst that we've seen so far. Anyways, let's go with you give your description of the movie.
Yeah, not too much to say. That I feel like most people at this point have seen this movie or at least know the gist of it.
Yeah, just sum it up
Ferris
for us.
Bueller is a high school kid that fakes being sick for a day so he can like play hooky and goes on a bunch of adventures with his friends, gets into trouble, somehow makes it back to his home just in the nick of time before his parents catch him, but makes plenty of memories along the way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That's
how heartwarming.
That's my little, like, I've got this much, like 2 inches of space in the newspaper column. This is what I'm going to give my synopsis.
Hey, that was a good one. And I wonder how that compares to what I said before the movie, more or less, something along those lines. According to our TV description, it says, after high school slacker Ferris Bueller successfully fakes an illness in order to skip school for the day, he goes on a series of adventures throughout Chicago with his girlfriend Sloane and his best friend Cameron, all the while trying to outwit his wily school principal and fed up sister.
Yeah.
Mildly more detail than you, but...
I mean, I don't feel like he was actively trying to outwit his sister.
No.
Definitely the principal, for sure. But his sister was more just she
was being an older sister.
Yeah. Well, she was trying to find it out on her own, but I don't think he was really fully aware of that as much. But yeah, otherwise, yeah, makes sense. Was the movie what you expected? Yeah.
Yes.
Because I've seen it before. Yeah. It felt about right of what I remembered.
And even, I mean, kind of skipping ahead a little bit to, does the title fit the movie? Yes.
Yeah.
And like the title, I think kind of sets up pretty much what you expect of the movie too. Yeah.
If it was something where like along the lines of like thinking back to like Risky Business, I could see some like clever naming like that of like, you know, just being called like Hooky or something like that. I think this title is obviously now iconic, but fits it so well.
And also, I think maybe this is a little bit more along the lines of what I was expecting for Risky Business, as opposed to what we got from Risky Business.
Yeah.
Maybe because I'd seen this before and I was like, 80s movie, high schooler, getting into some trouble. This is the kind of trouble I expected. Just like...
So when did Risky Business come
83.
out? 83. So this was 3 years later. I was actually wondering while we were watching this, I want to look up and see, was Tom Cruise considered for this role? Obviously, this came out the same year as Top Gun, and he was playing an older, character then, or at least older than a high schooler. But I feel like he and Matthew Broderick might be about the same age.
I'm pretty sure they're the same age.
That I could have seen.
Because he was 24 when this was made. And
I'm pretty sure
this
being made, written with Tom Cruise in mind.
I'm pretty sure Tom Cruise was 24 in Top Gun. In this, and Matthew Broderick was 24 in this, and they're the same year. So,
but maybe they also were like, well, if he was a high schooler in this movie, and this movie's being made 3 years later, we can't have Tom Cruise in it. But I very much could have seen him being seen. It would be a bit different. I think Matthew Broderick did an amazing job.
Oh my God, so good,
fantastic. But I could have seen Tom Cruise being dropped in at that time period.
And okay, so I guess apparently this is just really what I expected for Risky Business now that I'm thinking about it, because I think I was expecting Tom Cruise's character in Risky Business to be a little bit more like Ferris Bueller.
More confident, sociopathic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not, soliciting prostitutes.
How well did it age?
I think it aged well. I mean, as far as the very basic premise, trying to skip school.
Yeah, it's hard because I think a lot of it relies on some technological things where like not being able to like, obviously parents might text, but they could also use like Find My iPhone to figure out where you are throughout the day if they were really suspicious. You're not going to be hacking into the school computer to edit your absences or anything.
But I mean, I think a lot of his like the whole premise of the movie is based on technology. It would look different today, but I think you could still use a lot of the technology, and especially maybe kids are smarter than parents these days. Who knows? Maybe parents are smarter technologically in certain ways, and kind of play with that somehow and dramatize it a little bit.
I feel like if anything, the technological aspect, it would be like he calls his nerdy friend, and his nerdy friend who happens to be a computer hacker, and it would be way over the top silly to do something like that, to fake
coming from a software engineer.
Yeah, that's not how things actually work. But I could see computer security, at least in that day and age, if they had any sort of technological presence, there being zero security anyone that knew how to use a computer could probably log into those systems and change their
Oh, yeah.
records if they were keeping that online in that time. So that makes sense. Like that could have been made today. How like you said, it would have to be different, but the concept doesn't seem too crazy. What I found kind of funny though was they kept being like afraid they were going to get caught by people that like weren't their teachers. No one's going to bat an eye about a bunch of kids like running around and be like, you should be in school. I'm going to call your principal. No one cares. They were just like, please like move away so we don't have to care about you. But no one's going to like think, oh, these are high schoolers. We're totally going to catch them playing hooky.
And I also think, I don't know if it was like this in the 80s, having not lived in the 80s, but I just feel like everyone's kind of so much more caught up in their own worlds now that I don't know. I wouldn't be paying attention to these kids in a museum or in the parade or whatever.
Yeah. Or if you're just going to assume like maybe they're 18 and they just are there.
Yeah.
Like
especially
legally and
being high school seniors.
Yeah.
You're basically a college kid at that point. They said they were going to graduate in a few months. Like the difference there is not
no one's
much.
going to think twice.
For sure.
Did they say the title of the movie in the movie? No. They definitely said Ferris Bueller. I don't think they said Day Off. They might have mentioned it something at some point.
I mean, they talked a lot about his absences, but I don't think they said Day Off.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know, I feel like this movie really sets itself up to be one where they'd be like, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, or like something like super cheesy and cringy, but
I'm going to catch Ferris in his little day off or something like that. Were there any actors that went on to bigger things?
Matthew Broderick.
Yeah, obviously. still cracking.
And Jennifer Grey. Lots of stuff.
Ben Stein.
Oh, yeah.
his famous role in Ben Stein's Money.
And I mean, I feel like he's just in
so many things. I was surprised he's only 78 now, and it just seems like he should be like 178.
Yeah, because he looks so much older than Matthew Broderick in this. But he's really not. It's not that big of an age gap as what it felt like it should be.
Yeah, he definitely like talked like he was a lot older. He looked younger than I expected when I saw the scene again. But yeah, it's just wild to me that Ben Stein is not way older than he is.
And the school secretary, she's a big voice actress now, so she's been in a lot of things and a lot of other like supporting actress roles throughout her career. So it's a pretty good cast.
Charlie Sheen, obviously.
Yes.
And then the principal, he was in Clue, right? He was he the one that played?
No,
he
was not in Clue.
Not thinking of another actor. He just looks like he was in other things. I do know that he got into some legal trouble with some sex offender type things, which
this movie really sets up a lot of that.
Yeah, it like seeing him trespass and try to break into a kid's home kind of fits the bill there.
Yeah, because you told me that pretty early on in the movie, and the whole time I was just kind of like, yeah. You're a little creepy.
What impact do you think this movie had on pop culture?
A lot. I feel like it's referenced all the time.
The Anyone Bueller is like one of the most overrated, like cliche things.
Way overdone.
Yeah. And I think just the general idea of like how people view like playing hooky or a day off, like could be like no one ever would actually do that. I don't think you could fit all of those things into a single day anyways. But
yeah, that's what I kept thinking about. I was like, I am physically exhausted. They went to a baseball game. They were in a parade. They were at a museum. I mean, they drove from the suburbs to downtown Chicago.
Which I imagine takes forever on a good day.
The one time we drove from Chicago to the suburbs of Chicago, it took forever.
I mean, that was on a holiday weekend and like around rush hour. But yeah, I imagine that most times it's not a smooth drive in and out of Chicago on a weekday, especially because they were trying to leave somewhere around rush hour. I had a note about like why do they keep wasting so much time, knowing they wanted to do all of these things. And in the beginning, they're just hanging out around their house. He's taking time calling his friend, going over to his house, talking to him, going back and forth.
What time do they even leave?
I did a quick Google search that there is a website trying to like map out a timeline, but they call it like the impossible timeline of Ferris
I love
Bueller.
the internet so much. People of the internet are amazing.
And he must have spent like 2 minutes at the baseball game, like 5 minutes at the museum. Like there's not really any way anyone could possibly do all this, especially because a school day is really like 6 to 7 hours. It's not even a full time. And obviously it's more around the parents' work day. But unless the parents get to work at like 7 a.m. and get home at 7 p.m., you're still trying to crunch a lot into a single day.
I doubt his mom as a realtor is getting to work at 7 a.m. No one is really itching to buy a house at 7 a.m.
Yeah. It seemed way too much into one day for not really any reason. Like the whole baseball scene and some of those other things could have been left out to make it seem more practical, but it's a movie. It's fun.
Oh, I love that someone sat down to try to figure that out. That's amazing. I'd love to look at that.
I mean, I was going to do it myself until I was like, someone's probably done this before. But the final question is, do you feel cultured after watching it?
Yes. I mean, I'd seen it before, but I think it was good to see it again and to kind of have it fresh. And
I don't think you could like say like, I know a lot of the pop culture movies without having seen this 100%. Like it's very, well quoted and everyone kind of knows a lot of the iconic scenes, the parade scene and all that. I don't know how much it really influenced other movies. I imagine it influencing a lot more like, kid shows or things along those lines of like what a day off could be like or what playing hooky could be like. I could see like a Recess episode being based off of this or some other cartoon show like Doug or something being influenced by it.
Yeah, and I think I enjoyed it from having watched a bunch of 70s comedies and then watched like action 80s movies and then seeing what 80s comedies were. I think just like adding that to our culture backlog.
Yeah, plus there's a lot of GIFs that I've seen, at least the one of Cameron's like face in several of them that definitely leads into the pop culture of today's memes.
All right, you want to go first with your notes?
Yeah. So my first note was that it was directed, or at least directed by John Hughes. And
classic.
I feel like it had a lot of those similar like, vibes of a John Hughes movie of like just really going like in on the adolescent teenager lifestyle and felt very familiar to all the other like John Hughes movies.
For sure.
Had a list of all the characters we've already talked about or the actors. The beginning parts where he's breaking the fourth wall. Ferris is like talking to the camera, going through like showing some graphics on the scene as he's like talking. It felt very much like today's modern YouTube videos, especially like a Wheezy Waiter video.
Oh my God, I totally agree.
He's going through his life, because his day, he's kind of talking, walking up to the camera, showing like some text on the screen.
Got like his like checklist going.
And that he didn't really do that much towards the rest of the movie. He definitely died off very quickly in.
I would have loved to have seen that keep going, just to make some continuity throughout the whole movie.
He did break the fourth wall a little bit towards the end, but it was more just like making eyes at the camera or like a
Jim Halpert.
Yeah, but in the beginning, it felt like I was watching like a YouTube video.
100%, especially once the text started popping up on the screen. I was like, are we watching something from the 80s or from right now?
And I wonder how easy that was to add those text and graphics. Obviously, you've got credits shown overlaid in movies before and after that.
I hadn't even thought about that.
But was that effort to put that in and overlay that when you're working with film versus working with digital? The Ben Stein ad lib where he's the teacher. I did know going into it that there was no script for that. When he's talking about the economic lessons, they just told him, go ahead and talk about economics. Just rant about something you find interesting. And he just went and talked for a while, and no one really pays much attention to what he does talk about, but apparently it all like is very real, makes sense, and was interesting to him. And he just was, like, I can't believe people don't find this super interesting.
I also just like on that note ish, the two high school teachers that they really showed were the like English professor. It's not even, it looked like it was in a college room, which is why I say professor. The English teacher, the old guy who's just droning on, and then there's Ben Stein just like droning on and on and on. And I just thought that like their idea of what a high school teacher is definitely not what a high school teacher is right now.
Yeah,
I feel like it's so much more women, and like as a former teacher, like even up through high school, it's like, what kind of like theatrics can I put on to entertain you and to get you excited about what I'm trying to teach you right now?
It 100% felt like a John Hughes, here's a very characterized version of what a teacher is like, and showing all the bored kids like drooling and falling asleep at their desk. Felt very much like he was trying to show like school's so boring, just to contrast with you could be outside doing
for sure
fun things, learning, like being cultured by being in a parade and all that. But that actually leads me into my next note of it wasn't realistic having an admin that like cares so much about someone missing school. I feel like nowadays it's more just like, I'll make the note of that, but I'm not going to go track down a kid, let alone like go to his house.
I was going to say, like, I had a note. You might care like emotionally, but no admin physically has the time to leave school during the school day, because I don't think admin sit down ever. Like, I think they are just constantly like room to room to room, to like solving problems, putting out fires, all that stuff. That like, oh yeah, let me just leave school for the entire day to track down this one kid.
Yeah. You might make a phone call to like the parents or make a note of it somewhere, but you're not going to go like actually to their house or
that's something you address after the bell rings.
Trespass, try to look in their window. Like, no, absolutely not. No admin has that much time, patience, desire. Like
and everybody's so burnt out now. No one can. No one can do that anymore.
Hell, we talked about how we'd have nowhere near enough time to do all these things in one day. It would have to be over several days to do that. I thought it was funny what I called drone shots when they were going through Chicago was very much a helicopter flight, and it was not stabilized. Like,
I was going to say, I noticed the stabilization was
didn't feel very, like, obviously most drones now have the gimbal and feel very smooth. But in addition to that, the shot of Jennifer Grey at the end of a hall where they're zooming in on her, I thought it was interesting they didn't use like a dolly shot or some sort of like stabilization to like it very much, you could tell it was someone walking with the camera where it was kind of bumping a little bit as they were taking steps.
And that didn't like fit with,
and I don't really understand why.
I feel like there was probably a reason, but I don't get it.
Yeah, I definitely think that they could have done something smoother. I just don't really know why, if they were trying to make it seem like a human was actually walking, but she's sitting there like kind of I think she's just staring at the camera, but like voicing over her thoughts of like, I'm going to catch Ferris. And yeah, just found that artistic decision interesting.
For sure.
Vanity plates galore. There were so many, like, I think, was the mom trying to sell like vacation homes? Is that what she was doing?
So I did a quick deep dive while we were watching, or while the credits were rolling, because I also had a note about the vanity plates, and they were all intentionally done. So
Cameron's dad
was nervous, just because you're like nervous you're gonna be caught all day long. The mom was vacation because John Hughes had recently directed National Lampoon's Vacation, and they were hoping like enough audiences were still like loving that movie that they would notice that. The principals was for FBDO, for Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And there's a couple more.
I saw his and I was like, his doesn't really make any sense. Maybe his is supposed to be like random because he's supposed to be a poor teacher or something.
They were all very intentional. And because I noticed it too, and I thought the same thing about his. I was like, oh, his must not be as obvious as those other ones are. I think there's one for the sister too. I didn't finish reading the article, but there was one. They're like every vanity or every license plate that you see has a reason behind it, and I will link that article in a story for this episode.
Yeah, also, back to the sister though, I don't have a note on this one, but when she's driving home to catch him, she's like flooring it through residential streets. The cops are coming after her, and then we never see the cops. Does she like lose them? Is the mom not freaking out in the passenger seat, being like, pull over, pull over, pull over, there's cops behind us?
Yeah, as soon as the cops started following, the mom stopped, like they stopped showing them inside the car. There it was when the mom and dad are talking outside the house. She said that she got a speeding ticket and then another one, or so. Like she references getting tickets, but we don't see that.
Just something unnecessary to have them. Like she could have been flooring it or run it, but she didn't necessarily need to have the cops to then not see them on camera. Yeah. Maybe there's a deleted scene or something. Are there weekday parades like commonly in Chicago? I assume it was like a holiday.
Had a note of this.
Like
what?
It seems very impractical to have that in the middle of the weekday, like the work day.
Especially like in a major city, like people work there. Like it's such a like heavy like traffic zone.
To lock down any, if not multiple streets, would just be absolute chaos. I'm sure Chicago has enough traffic problems as it is. They don't need weekday parades for some German holiday shutting everything down.
Yep.
Very, very odd. All the Save Ferris signs. I always found it interesting because I know one of the first times I watched it, my sister pointed out Save Ferris was actually a band in the 90s. So it's like a ska band that named after Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I was young when I first saw that, but didn't really put it together that band was formed like 10 years after the movie came out. That I thought it was like a reference. She explained it to me, leading me to believe that it was a reference to the band, but the band was a reference to
oh, sweet baby that. Andrew.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not up to date on ska bands in the 80s and 90s.
No, I mean, I would have absolutely fallen for the same thing, but just
so because I remember her pointing out like, oh, Save Ferris, like the band. And I was like, oh, it's a reference to the band. No, the band was much later, but They had a lot of the Save Ferris signs there from.
Can we also just talk about his name for a second? Like his first name is Ferris. Do you know anybody named Ferris?
Nope. Unless maybe the guy that invented the wheel. I don't know.
Right? And like that was his last name.
Is that a deeper thing? He goes round and round.
And maybe because it's in Chicago.
I don't know.
Like the whole World's Fair Ferris wheel was in Chicago. So I don't, maybe that has some kind of crossover there, but.
Yeah. What was the movie in the like 90s or 2000s, the Max Keebler's Big Move or something? Mm-hmm. I feel like that's a more common name. I always say name Max. I'm trying to think of other movies that like the kids, teenage movies that have like the full name in it. And I feel like it's a very unique name to have in there.
I love that connection to Max Keebler's Big Move because it's very much a similar
full name to words,
type title.
Is in action, yeah.
I don't know that I've seen that movie, but I do remember it was hype for a while.
I'm thinking about it. It probably was directly influenced by this. So we're going to watch that sometime soon.
I don't hate it. I really don't.
I haven't watched that in 20 years, but yeah, we're going to watch that. I need a making of the parade scene though. I want to see what all went into it because there's a lot of over the top like dancing that was very much more than just, hey, we have some extras or we have something going on in the background. It was like, hey, we're going to hire a bunch of like street performers to go do some full on choreographed dancing during this parade scene.
So I did also look up because I was concerned about the midweek parade. I was just like, what is that?
Yeah.
And apparently they happened to be filming in Chicago when an actual parade was happening, the Von Steuben Day parade. And so they got, I don't know, I didn't read too much because I was obviously watching the movie, that I got enough to like understand that there was a real parade that they weren't really planning on. So they got some of the like B-roll scenes or like some of the scenes for that. I think they went back and shot more afterwards, but there was some kind of crossover with some of that stuff. With just like happenstance.
Hey, it's doing all these crazy things. Oh, there's a parade in town today. Go ahead and we're going to throw Ferris Bueller into this parade as well. Interesting. But yeah, I still want to see more of the making of it because it seemed like there was just so much going on. So many people in there.
And I just feel like a whole making of that movie would be really fascinating. Like all the, like the things in his bedroom with the trophy hanging on the door and just like
he seemed
thinking
to be
about all that stuff.
Some sort of like sociopath, genius, engineer / like he would have like gone on to like lead some sort of like country in some sort of crazy revolution someday. Like the mind power and engineering power he had just.
Apparently John Hughes is quoted as saying that Ferris Bueller would either be president of the United States or in prison.
Yep. 100%. I totally agree there, Johnny. And then there was the singing telegrams that showed up for Ferris at some point where I guess the school or someone had sent them. And they also had that in the movie Clue. And were singing telegrams a thing? Is that?
I exclusively know of singing telegrams from the movie Clue.
And Elf.
That's a Christmas gram.
I'm here with my dad. But like, other than those times, I'm not really sure I've ever thought of like a singing telegram. Is that something that exists today?
There's some in Friends too.
Also, do you want to have like a new startup idea where we?
Don't you ever send me a singing telegram?
No, we're send other people telegrams.
I'm just putting it out there. Okay. I don't want one. Do not send me one.
Is this one of those like I want one?
No, I don't. I do not want one.
We'll see.
Oh my. Okay, if you send me one, I'm going to send you one. Someone to come and talk to you at the door.
All right, we'll have some rival telegrams.
Oh God, this is too much for me. I hate this.
But that's the end of my notes.
So my first note is the perspective cam of him from in bed, which kind of gave me similar Risky Business vibes, where he was like at the beginning of Risky Business, where it was that one like follow shot where you only see his parents, but you don't see Tom Cruise for so long that, you know, Ferris Bueller's in bed and he's looking up at his parents. It kind of gave me that similar, like videography perspective, which I thought was pretty cool. You talked about breaking the fourth wall, which I remembered from the movie, but just something that you don't see very often, and it's always almost like alarming at first when you first start watching something where they're breaking the fourth wall. It was really big
on breaking the fourth wall, and I guess in Home Alone, Macaulay Culkin kind of breaks the fourth wall a little bit, like talking to the camera.
Pause for just a second, because my next note is I got a lot of Home Alone vibes from this.
Oh, there it is.
And I mean, obviously,
I knew 3 years later.
I knew that like that Home Alone came out after this, but I think. And John Hughes wrote it, and obviously there was some similarities there, where I feel like Macaulay Culkin doesn't fully break the fourth wall as much as he's like talking to himself as like, I'm home alone. Like, I'm going to brush my hair in the mirror and talk to myself in the mirror, or like this whole ice cream all to myself, or like this whole cheese pizza all to myself.
Yeah, but
it's a lot more
he's like
to himself.
At least in Home Alone 2, like, my parents are in Florida and I'm in New York. My parents are in Florida, I'm in New York, and does like the eyebrow thing. He's kind of talking to the camera there.
I feel like it's more like looks. He's like talking to himself, but it's like looks to the camera. Yeah. But
definitely not as intense as this one is.
It's nothing along the lines of this. But I appreciated Home Alone more, seeing that this came first, and just like him in his robe. And I also feel like there was some similar, obviously Macaulay Culkin was a child and Ferris Bueller was 24 years old, or sorry, Matthew Broderick was 24 years old.
Yeah, Macaulay Culkin was not that old, unless there's some sort of weird like Benjamin Button disease or something.
No. That Matthew Broderick was 24 when this was filmed. That there were some differences there, but I felt like even just like how they talked in their performances, and like their like mouths and facial structures felt really similar.
That's what I was
in the bathrobe.
At the beginning, where I'm like John Hughes. This felt very much like a John Hughes movie.
And just like all the hijinks too, where you see Ferris Bueller talking to the camera like about something else, and you see him tying the rope, and then you see later scene that like the mom opens the door, but the trophy is using the string that he was tying around the trophy earlier, was weighting it down, and just like all of that stuff.
Much stuff in a house also felt very much like a.
Very true.
But I don't know if that was just what it was like in the 80s and 90s of just having so much like stuff in a house.
But also just like, what was John Hughes' house like? Did he have a bunch of booby traps set up at all times where like if someone rings the doorbell, this tape plays, and like you open my bedroom door and this mannequin sits up, and
probably
it's
his
just
dream for someone to get caught in one of those booby traps.
Just like the kind of mental engineering that takes to be like, okay, we're gonna have this here, and that's gonna make you think this and do this, and just so much overlap
all
there.
All the protagonists in his movies must have been like crazy engineering sociopaths or something. We know Macaulay Culkin or Kevin McAllister was definitely some sort of sociopath to try to have so much.
For sure.
Violence against some.
Lighting their heads on fire, burning their hand. I mean, stepping on the nail.
But I wonder, though, thinking now about the fourth wall thing, how common it was to break the fourth wall that intently, especially with like the overlays on the screen. Was this one of the first ones? And I guess for the cultural significance, I feel like this at least influence what I think is like YouTube nowadays of talking to the camera, having the text overlaid just felt very much like it was YouTube before YouTube. But yeah, I want to look more into how that was kind of perceived. Was that more common to have the fourth wall broken, or was this revolutionary?
For sure. Definitely be interesting to find out. My next note is technology. And we kind of touched on this at the beginning of like how he has all of the like coughing, sneezing sounds programmed into his keyboard, and the stereo system, and like how much it relied on answering machines of this calls to this and do this. And like that, obviously that was super technologically advanced for 1986. And it feels so outdated now, but it's like very impressive thinking like they didn't have the smartphones and the apps and the digital stuff that we have today, and just how cool that was to rig all that up.
Effort that would have taken to do. But now that you talk about that, though, reminds me of like Home Alone 2 with the talk boy and the little refrigerator you have to open with a key, like that, with like recording.
That was a really good impression. That was so good.
But like having to do that, and the connecting all those things together, and like anticipating what people are going to say or ask with like the doorbell was very much like trying to rent that hotel room. You have to kind of anticipate what they're going to say so you can pre-record it and play it back.
Mr. McAllister, the father.
The father.
Our invitations are really good. But I mean, obviously we kind of talked about that too in the, like, could this be made today? That would be different, but how cool it was at the time, I'm sure too, in the 80s, being like, oh man, using this for this. And like, that's not something that most everyday people would think of. And it takes a sociopath genius to connect all that stuff together.
I mean, now I feel like people get a lot more lazy on the technology part, and they're just like, oh, the kid would be a computer genius and have just like hacked their way through it. Whereas this took more ingenuity to be like, they're going to record on this, hook this recorder up to the doorbell thing, like more possible than just like, oh, we're going to hand wave it away with just computer hackery.
And then my next note is, so you're faking sick, taking the day off of school, and the first thing you're going to do is put on a suit. I mean, like pants, jacket, tie, is that really what you want to do on your day off? I mean, obviously he doesn't keep that outfit on, and I don't really know. I guess the suit is to get Sloan out of school.
But he's wearing like a trench coat in that part, and then they
What's the suit
change.
for?
Yeah.
Is it just to get Cameron to? I don't. I just
Cameron changes out of that into his like he's got like suspenders on. Then he changes into his hockey jersey, shirt, whatever, and then later back into that. Yeah, I thought the same thing.
Yeah, the suit just felt like. I mean, as someone who, as soon as the day is over, is like, I'm not wearing
Suits are not
real pants anymore.
Not
I'm not wearing, like, I'm putting my pajamas on as soon as it's bedtime or like relaxing time. That, like, oh, I'm gonna just like take a day off of school. Putting on a suit just didn't feel like a right choice for me. And then you talked about the vanity plates. I will deep dive the rest of those because I do feel like that's super interesting, and I'd like to see what the other ones, what they all meant. Because I saw, especially the vacation one, that I was like, VCTN.
Vatican, no.
And I was like, victim houses. I don't know. I was like, she's a realtor, just like trying to come up with something that could be. And you're like, could it be vacation? That to see that it had like a real like outside meaning to it was really cool. That I'd be interested to see what the other ones were. Can we just talk about Cameron's anxiety? Like, he very much had like some trauma and some anxiety. Like, he talks about how his parents are really unhappy. And I mean, I think it's interesting that they had that as like a character trait for him in the 80s, because we were not as big on mental health then. But they did not handle it very well. And it was just like, oh, he just like gets nervous. And
yeah, and then at the end, they're like, obviously after the car crashes through the window, he's like, oh, I'm going to confront my dad. I'm going to talk to him. And everyone's like happy that he's doing that. I'm like, this kid might get like beaten to smithereens, or like this seems like it's not something to be like a happy, like, oh, good, he's finally like got a backbone. No, dude, like, I feel like the dad's going to lose it, and this could be dangerous for everyone, or like, you know, if not physically, at least like emotionally and mentally. Yeah. There's obviously a lot of trauma that leads to someone going into a catatonic state when something like happens. Like, yeah,
there was just so much there where I was just like, someone just really needs to help him, because yikes. And when like Ferris is like, you know, he's happier when he's like sick than when he's healthier. Like, I mean, there was some kind of something like that where I was like, this guy definitely has some true anxiety for a reason. Like, it seems like his parents are really unhappy and don't have a super stable environment for him at home, that I feel like it would be a little bit more handled differently nowadays. So we kind of talked about how much planning it took for the doorbell and the, you know, anticipating what people are going to say and all that stuff, but also who plans out this whole day? Like, were you all like, okay, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to call Cameron and I'm going to convince him, and then we're going to go pick up Sloan, and then that'll be at this time. And we talked about the agenda, like the timing. But like, did you pre-plan that you were going to go to the baseball game and you were going to go to the museum and you were going to go?
100%, because before then there was no TikTok, there was no Instagram, there's nothing else to like waste all your time. So you would sit there and you'd plan.
Did have the time to do that.
I remember like in my like notebooks in school when I get bored throughout the day, planning so many things of like what I was going to do on my video game. I would plan out like entire characters that was going to take me like, you know, hundreds of hours to create in a video game, because I had nothing better to do. That I would plot those things down to like the second almost. That I very much see that of like, I'm going to plot this day out for years or at least weeks, and I'm going to figure out what all these things are. Yeah.
That makes me feel better, because now that you say it, I did have a very, very long list of all of the things I would have inside of my mansion when I was super, super rich one day.
When you were going to drive your limo around?
Yeah, I was going to drive my limo around because that was a practical vehicle as an option in the MASH game. And I was going to have a mansion with a Taco Bell inside of it, and probably a limited too, because it was the early 2000s, and a roller coaster and all that fun stuff. But Taco Bell was, I remember that being pretty high on my list.
I would love to have a Taco Bell in my mansion. I never thought about that.
And that's why we're married.
Yeah.
But anyways, just their agenda for the day is like you said, it was a lot of things, but how much of that was pre-planned or just like YOLO, let's go here, let's go here.
The parade clearly was not planned, but in that world it might have been.
And then after the parade, when they're in the taxi and they see his dad and he's reading the article. This isn't like a true crossover, but he's reading the Chicago Sun-Times, which is the newspaper that Drew Barrymore worked for in Never Been Kissed. So it was a little bit of a crossover from one of our other Culture Night.
They were clearly
movies.
throwing back to our other movies.
And obviously Never Been Kissed came out after this.
Time travel.
So it was not a direct reference, but as soon as I read it, I was like, that is from Never Been Kissed. So
all one big universe.
Like a little bit of like a half reference to another movie that we've seen so far.
Crazy.
I feel like we watched The Graduate and then we had a reference in Never Been Kissed. And then we haven't had any other like crossovers
we need to
yet.
go like Charlie and It's Always Sunny and have a board where we're just plotting all the
Oh my gosh, I love it. And we just like feel really crazy and we just scream about everything. Oh, I love it. So that's apparently my last note, but
yeah.
I very much enjoyed this week's episode. It's just, I feel like it's just like a nice movie that I'd like to watch in the middle of the week. Just very lighthearted, very easy to follow. But one more note that I didn't write down, but that I think we should talk about is that it was rated PG-13. And I feel like this was like the least
he
aggressive.
Had like a Microsoft Paint like boobs drawn on there.
But think about all the other PG movies that we've watched. That this one feels a lot more tame. I mean, like maybe take the like 2 pictures of boobs out of it, and it was like a very, very tame. That I don't know that I understand the PG-13
unless it was rated PG-13 to get more people to watch it. I feel like people like, oh man, it's PG-13 is going to be like a lot more like cussing and boobs and like to get the teens to watch it.
Marketing strategy.
100%.
Very true. I wouldn't have thought of that.
But speaking of getting people to watch it, I'm also impressed that they got us to watch all the way through the credits because they were able to have like a kind of a post-credits thing, like during the credits where he's the principal is like getting on a bus, or not principal, the dean of students getting on a bus, and then Ferris Bueller like comes out and like talks to the camera for like 20 seconds, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, credits are over. Holy crap, we watched the whole credits. You don't do that anymore. So
I don't know. Disney does put the little nuggets at the end of their
after the credits.
Yes,
but
to stay and watch till the end of the credits if you're watching.
You should have like zoning out or like talking or being like, can we fast forward through this or we'll wait for it.
That's
true. This was like, hey, I'm going to keep watching, and I've seen all the credits. Now, did I look at to see who played Best Boy or first key grip or whatever
favorite,
whatever those roles are? No, I didn't. But
positions.
I was present while all the credits rolled.
So I think that's really interesting. Just how movies are presented over time, where like back in the day, there was these really long introductions with all the credits at the beginning and then doing things like this where they're trying to get you to stay. I think it's just like interesting.
Now I'm curious, like if this is shown on TV, do they skip through all that or do they show all of those post-credit things?
I mean, it's probably in a little tiny square and you're
modified to fit your TV screen. They're going to cut that thing out or we'll see.
Yeah. But another good episode. And ready for next week, episode 10.
Yeah.
I'm so proud of us.
Double digits next week.
Cheers.
See you there.
See you next week.